Week 13 of the fantasy football season. His quarterback starts at every matchup this week to kick off the Thanksgiving games. Green Bay Packers at the Detroit Lions. So Jordan Love, his fantasy numbers haven't been great this season. I know the receiving room isn't that good as well. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, the top two guys in the receiving room for this Packer team. And obviously Tucker Kraft getting hurt a few weeks ago, tearing the ACL, being out for the season has been a big hit for this Packer team. So with the Packers being a run-first team, and this week a middle of the pack matchup for Jordan Love, he's a fringe option. Jared Goff will start. This offense, obviously, very explosive playmakers. Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams when he gets the ball in his hands at times. And Goff, even in a matchup versus a tougher defense, we know this offense is better at home more weeks than not than it is on the road. And Goff last week led the comeback late in that ball game, even though it was the New York Giants. So this week versus Green Bay, this could be a potential high-scoring game. He's a star. Kansas City Chiefs at the Cowboys. Patrick Mahomes having an MVP type of season. Led the comeback last week with a victory in overtime versus the Indianapolis Colts. And this week, a good matchup with the Dallas Cowboys. I know their defense has definitely improved over the last couple weeks. But Mahomes, he's matchup proof, and I expect a big game out of him. He's a start. Dak Prescott is start as well. He's having an MVP type of season, believe it or not. And last week to come from behind 21-0 and beat the Philadelphia Eagles and go over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game for Dak Prescott. This week, even versus a tough defense at Kansas City, he's a nice start. Cincinnati Bengals at the Baltimore Ravens. Joe Burrow back in the lineup. And I'm not going to be hesitant to put Joe Burrow back in the lineup. He's been practicing the last couple weeks here. Now they're making sure he's 100% ready to go, even though Cincinnati, we know they're out of it, but they're still going to try to go out there and win games with Burrow. And with Jamar Chase back in the lineup, even though T. Higgins is out, this week could be a potential high scorer in Baltimore. He's a start. Lamar Jackson a start each and every week. I know last week was a down game for him in a plus matchup versus the New York Jets that can't stop anyone. But this week, Cincinnati, the worst defense arguably in the league, coming in Thursday ball game, where usually these ball games there's not a lot going into them and it's high scoring more times than not. So Lamar a start. Chicago Bears at the Philadelphia Eagles. Caleb Williams, he's had a decent season. Early in the year he was off to a better start, putting up numbers, and this week in a tough matchup to go into Philadelphia and try to move the football consistently on that defense. He much. Roma Dunze, he hasn't done much the last couple weeks. DJ Moore did find the end zone twice last week, but for the most part this season, he really hasn't been good. And also, the running game has been iffy over the last couple weeks. So with those factors, and Caleb Williams has been an up-and-down quarterback, he's a sit for me this week. Jalen Hurts to start. Last week, this team came out firing quick and putting up points on the board. And then in the second half, the Cowboys defense shut them down. And also the play calling was a little weird as well in that ball game for Philadelphia. But this week, after a bad loss, choking a 3-touchdown lead versus the Cowboys, I think Hurts and this offense comes out and puts up a big ball game. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Tennessee Titans. Trevor Lawrence to start. Last week, he did turn the football over 4 times, but he did find the end zone 3 times. This week, a great matchup with Tennessee, a defense that's had trouble majority of the season stopping opposing offenses. And Brian Thomas Jr., I know he's had a bad year, but he's possibly returning to the lineup as well. So I think Lawrence, with all those factors, is a start. Cam Ward to sit. Last weekend of his better games of his NFL career is Cam Ward. But there's just no playmakers in this offense. Even when Calvin Ridley was there before he went down with injury, we didn't see much from him. So this week in a matchup, even though Jacksonville's defense isn't great, still Cam Ward, like I said, you don't have many playmakers, he's a sit. Atlanta Falcons at the Jets, Kirk Cousins a sit. Last week, the Jet defense, for the most part, they stifled Lamar Jackson and that Raven offense for a majority of the ball game until they got it right in that mid-third quarter, the fourth quarter. So Kirk Cousins last week, he was more of a game manager. He didn't do much in that ball game at the Saints. And this week, I see more of the same at the New York Jets, where the Jets offense can't put a lot of points on the board, and Cousins hands that football off a lot and doesn't make a lot of plays. So this week at the Jets, he's a sit. Tyrod Taylor sit. Last week he took a lot of big hits. Was Tyrod Taylor. I know John Mechie and him have a good rapport. They were making plays, but this Jet offense doesn't really have playmakers as well, obviously. And Tyrod Taylor, he's never really been a fantasy option. He's been a backup for a reason, obviously, in pro football, where he's a guy that can manage the game and make some plays at times. But even this week with Atlanta coming in, he's a sit. Los Angeles Rams at the Carolina Panthers. Matthew Stafford having an MVP type of season. And when you got 2 stud receivers like Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, it makes everything easier, and a good running back out of the backfield than Kyren Williams. So Matthew Stafford is putting up huge numbers this season, and this week in a good matchup with the Carolina Panthers, where their defense definitely improved from last season. Still vulnerable to giving up points, and Stafford's been matchup proof all season long. He's an easy start. Bryce Young is sit. We've seen some flashes from the former number 1 overall pick a few seasons ago in the NFL draft, and then we've seen games like we did last week at the 49ers where he couldn't get anything going besides one touchdown to Torrey McMillan, but he took a lot of hits in that ball game. Was Bryce Young. He didn't want comfortable in the pocket, and this week versus a good Ram defense, he's not a quarterback I would trust, so he's a sit this week. New Orleans Saints at the Miami Dolphins. Tyler Shough, he's a sit in this one. Shuck's been all right at times in the few starts we've seen from him this season, and this week it is a good matchup at the Dolphins, a defense that's had trouble all season long, but Miami coming off bye. Their defense has been better at home than it's on the road, and Tyler Shough, he really doesn't have much upside. We're pretty much Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, the only two options in this offense he could count on, and Alvin Kamara is banged up as well. Now to the Dolphins, Tua, he's a fringe option for me in this ball game is Tua. Tua, we've seen some big games from him this season. Him and Jalen Waddle are locked in and making plays, and Devon Achane, one of the better all-round backs in all pro football. And this week, what a good matchup with New Orleans coming in, but with every team playing this week, I don't think Tua is a quarterback many fantasy owners are going to put out there in their lineup, and I don't think his ceiling's that high as well. He's a fringe option. Arizona Cardinals at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jacoby Brissett, he's been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in points over the last month of the season, and it doesn't matter who's in there for this Arizona Cardinal team. He's going out there and he's swinging the rock and putting points on the board as Jacoby Brissett. So every week he's had 20 or more fantasy points since he's become the starter for Kyler Murray as Jacoby Brissett. And this week at Tampa Bay, a defense that's had trouble the last month of the season stopping anyone. And even if it's garbage time in this one, it just seems like Brissett is going to get his points one way or another. Baker Mayfield, that's shoulder sore. He's got a sprain in there, but it's the non-throwing arm, obviously. What the game last week in the blowout at the Los Angeles Rams. So if Baker plays, it's a good matchup versus a bad defense of the Arizona Cardinals. I would give him a start. And if Teddy Bridgewater's in there last week, he was taking a lot of sacks, holding on to the football. And obviously, I think Teddy Bridgewater, his best days are behind him, and he's not a quarterback option you want in your lineup this week, even if he's the starter in a good matchup. He's a sit. San Francisco 49ers at the Cleveland Browns. Brock Purdy is sit for me in this game. Last week, he was just tossing that football anywhere all over the yard, and he threw 3 interceptions as Brock Purdy. So maybe the timing's off a little bit. We know he missed tons of weeks. About 8 or 9 weeks, I think he missed this season with Brock Purdy. And this week, it is a tougher matchup with the Cleveland Browns, one of the better pass rush teams in the league. They had 10 sacks last week. Myles Garrett already 18 sacks on the season, looking to break the all-time record in a single season with 22.5 for Strahan and TJ Watt. So Brock Purdy, like I said, last week, just throwing it anywhere, picked off 3 times by the mediocre Carolina defense. And this week, like I said, a tough matchup versus a good defense of the Browns. He's a sit. Shedeur Sanders a sit as well. Robert Saleh's got this defense playing good as the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49er team. He couldn't cut it as a head coach, but as a DC, he's been making all the right calls. And with Nick Bosa and Fred Warner out for the season, this 49er defense still going out there making plays and stopping opposing offenses. Shedeur Sanders, last week it was an okay game for him at the Vegas Raiders, and this week with a tough 49er defense coming in, he's easily a sit for me. Houston Texans at the Indianapolis Colts. CJ Stroud's going to return to the lineup this week after missing 3 games with a concussion, and Davis Mills, he filled in very well for this Houston Texan team. But this week, a tougher matchup in Indianapolis where their defense plays better at home than it does on the road. And I thought at times in that ball game, Indianapolis last week did play good versus a good Kansas City Chief offense. So this week, Stroud back in the lineup. His numbers haven't been impressive all season long. He's a sit. Daniel Jones, a fringe option. Very tough defense coming in. This is obviously a division matchup as well where anything goes in these ball games. Even though Daniel Jones last week in a tough matchup, he had 20 fantasy points, and that one was Daniel Jones at the Kansas City Chiefs. But this Texan defense, ranked number 1 defense in all the league, and like I said, a division game, it's going to be a grinded-out type of game. He's a fringe option. Minnesota Vikings at the Seattle Seahawks. J.J. McCarthy banged up with a concussion, and even if he does play McCarthy, we've seen nothing from him. Taking a lot of hits, holding on to the football too long. He's been a turnover machine, and he can't get anything going. He will be a sit. Max Brosmer, he's an unknown, but he's not a guy you're going to have confidence in his first career NFL start if he makes the start in this ball game at the Seattle Seahawks. A defense, especially at home, that's gone out there, creating big turnovers and making big plays. He's a sit. Sam Darnold to start. The juices are flowing for Darnold versus his former team last season where he had an MVP caliber season a majority of the season. Minnesota didn't want to pay him, and now Minnesota back to bite Minnesota now that Sam Darnold's having a good season with his new team, and they are a playoff team right now, and Minnesota one of the worst teams in the NFC at 4-7 on the season. So with those factors, Sam Darnold, I think, goes out there and has a good game. Buffalo Bills at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Josh Allen to start. Last week it was a down game. Houston, they got Josh Allen early and often 8 sacks in that game. But Allen, we rarely see 2 bad fantasy games in a row for him. So this week at the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think he bounces back and has a big ball game where their defense really hasn't stopped anyone in the last few weeks. As well, Aaron Rodgers, we know he's dealing with the left wrist fracture. Didn't play in last week's game. He tried giving it a push to give it a go, but the medical staff was against it. And they lost the game in Chicago, so to me, it wouldn't be surprising if Rodgers is back out there. And this week, it's an all right matchup versus the Bills, but at this point of his career, and also not 100% with the left wrist injury, Rodgers to me would be a fringe option at best. Mason Rudolph is it. We haven't seen much from Rudolph throughout his career. I know last week he went out there, made some plays, kept them in the ball game obviously, but couldn't get them down the last drive to at least force overtime. So this week, even versus a mediocre Bill defense, he's a sit. Vegas Raiders at the Los Angeles Chargers. Geno Smith, he's a sit for me in this ball game. Geno Smith, it's been a horrible season for him, throwing interceptions, holding on to the football too much, taking sacks and flipping off fans as well. So he's been frustrated, and we know this a lot of guys throughout their careers, when they go to the Raiders, their career comes to an end. So it's just been a horrible first season over there in Vegas. And this week in a tough matchup off a fresh defense of Los Angeles Chargers going into there, he's a sit. Justin Herbert to start. This week a great matchup. Like I said, coming off a bye, Amari Hampton possibly returning to the lineup as well, where he's a good running back in his rookie season. We really saw him start getting going before he went down early in the season with injury. But when you get guys like McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, and Andre Gatson in that offense, and especially in a matchup versus a bad defense, I think he could go out there and have a big game. Denver Broncos at the Commanders, Bo Nix to start. I know the numbers the last couple weeks have gone down for Bo Nix, but this is a plus matchup. Denver coming off by, and him and Troy Franklin have been really locked in over the last few weeks here, is Bo Nix and Franklin. And this week, at a Commander defense that can't stop anyone, he's a nice start. Marcus Mariota, sit for me in this ball game. Mariota, he's got good rushing upside. I know Jaden Daniels, he returned to practice but not expected to play. And this is just a very tough matchup versus the Denver Broncos, one of the best defenses in the league and possibly the best. New York Giants at the Patriots to close out the week on Monday night. Jackson Dart, he missed the last 2 games coming off a concussion. And last week he did practice, was Jackson Dart, but maybe this Giant team's figuring we'll give him one more week off, let him hit the bye, and Jameis played good last week, so he might sit in this game. But if Dart does give it a go with his rushing upside and game play ability, getting that football down the field, he would be a start in this ball game. And Jameis Winston, if he's the starter once again, last week I know he had the monster game, over 35 fantasy points it was for Jameis Winston, where we know he's a gunslinger, and even caught a 33-yard touchdown, breaking a tackle to carry the defender into the end zone. But this week in New England, it's one of those games where it's tough to go into Foxborough, especially this time of year, and where they're on a 9-game win streak here. He would be a sit. And Drake May, stud quarterback, what a second season it's been for him. I know last week a little underwhelming numbers were in a plus matchup with Cincinnati, but this week back home, and this Giant team, one of the worst defenses in the league, and just firing their defensive coordinator. Drake May, a must start this week. Sats quarterback starts it every matchup for week 13 of the fantasy football season.